Welcome back to the part 2 of the lecture series How to Conduct Factor Analysis, the procedural step. In the previous lecture, I discussed the preparatory stage of doing factor analysis. The first step was the research question and design of the factor analysis. Then after that, collecting data and the checking the appropriateness of the data matrix, the composition of data matrix, sample size, etc. And then after getting the data, selecting the measure of association, whether we will compute a distance measure or a coefficient of correlation. And I said that most often we go for correlation coefficients. So based on that correlation coefficient measure, we will create a correlation matrix, a matrix of the interrelationship among the variables, and then that correlation matrix will be tested for its appropriateness. And a correlation matrix will be considered appropriate for factor analysis if the variables are not unrelated with each other and there is no issue of multicollinearity. So we use several indices, Bartlett test of sphericity, which assumes, which tests the null hypothesis that the variables in the population are uncorrelated. So when Bartlett test of sphericity comes significant, the null hypothesis is rejected and we conclude that the correlation matrix is not having too many zero or near zero correlations. Similarly, the measure of sampling adequacy is also applied, and that is KMO, the Kaiser-Meyer-Oakland measures of sampling adequacy. And if the value is zero point 0.5 or higher, the correlation matrix is considered appropriate for factor analysis. And anti-image correlation matrix is also examined. If all the diagonal values are the diagonal values are like KMO, and if they are zero point 0.5 or higher, then the correlation matrix is considered appropriate. And finally, to rule out the possibility of multicollinearity, we determine the determinant. And if determinant is greater than 0.00, that the correlation matrix is considered appropriate for factor analysis. After that, we select which factor analytic method has to be used. And in previous lecture, I said that depending on the research questions, we have to decide which factor analytic method will be best for our research. But most commonly, the principal component analysis and principal factor analysis, they are being used. So if we are using, say, principal component analysis or principal axis factor analysis, and for this purpose any other factor analysis, and I will focus on exploratory factor analysis only, then the first and most important question comes to the mind is that how many factors to extract. The purpose of the factor analysis, as I said in my all earlier lectures, is data reduction, is dimension reduction. So if we are working with, say, 100 variable, we always aim to arrive at fewer variables, say 5, 6, 10, like that. So what will be the best number of factors? There are different methods to determine this. I will discuss a subset of those methods, not all, which are most commonly used in the factor analytic research. Initially, it is not known to us how many factors are there. So we must use some method to estimate number of factors. These factors, the number of factors needs to be specified by the investigator. And none of the methods available can be considered 100% statistical test that these are the correct number of factors. I will discuss some of the methods. that are now less used and some of the methods that are widely used. The initial one method that is widely used, that was widely used, was latent root method. This is also called eigenvalue greater than equal to 1 method. So this method suggests that we will retain as many factors as they are having their eigenvalue 1 or higher. But this method generally fail to provide the exact estimate of the number of factors and has found to have several limitations. Sometimes it underestimates, sometimes it's overestimate. This method was basically suggested by Kaiser, and for alpha factor analysis, this method generally provides a better estimate, but for most of other methods, the latent root method is not considered that good. Another method is percent variance method. We extract as many factors that are required to explain a predefined variance in the total variance. But this method is also not very good. How to decide what amount of variance should be explained? Whether 50% variance is okay, 80% variance is okay, 70% variance is okay. There is no statistically reliable way to decide a priori the percent variance explained. So it will always be arbitrary. So these two methods are less used because of their limitations. The other two methods, that is the Scree plot and the parallel analysis, they are very widely used method in determining the number of factors. And I will discuss in little details these two methods. Scree plot is given by Cattell, and this is basically the plot of the eigenvalues for all the components or the factors. And based on this plot, the number of factors is decided. And parallel analysis is similar in some sense to a Scree plot. I will explain these two in details. But other than Scree plot and parallel analysis, there are other methods for determining number of factors that I am not going to discuss here, but you should know, like C-Hull method is there, broken stick method is there. There are other methods also that are used by researchers to determine the number of factors. But most commonly, for example, Welliser's map, minimum average partial analysis, is also one very good method for determining number of factors. But Scree plot and parallel analysis often provide good estimate of the number of factors to be retained. It doesn't mean that I am not going to say that you don't do the other methods, but these two methods are sufficient for the present purpose. So I am explaining these two. You must go and learn the other methods also. For my own research, I use other methods also, and I see whether there is convergence or not. If many of the times all the methods provide the same results, then we become more sure that the number of factors that should be retained or that are significant are the number which is suggested by all the methods. So Scree plot, as I said, is plotting the eigenvalues. So eigenvalue is represented on y-axis and the number of components or factors on the x-axis. And we plot the eigenvalue. This portion is called Scree. It is a geological term. So like a sea which is very deep in the beginning and then it becomes shallow. So this shallow portion is called Scree. In Scree, what we do, that we decide how many components or factors they are in almost in the same line, and from where the curve change. So we decide the elbow of this scree plot, and the number of components above this elbow, they are considered as significant factors to retain. So here is the elbow in this. Suddenly the eigenvalue drops, and then the drop is very slow, very low. And therefore, in this scree plot, we are able to see that there are only two components or two factors above the scree, and therefore according to this scree plot we will retain only two factors. Let me repeat it again, that in a scree plot we will plot the eigenvalues, and then we will determine the number of components above the scree. This is the scree, and for this we generally determine the elbow of the graph. But remember, sometimes the elbow is not that much clear. So nowadays some mathematical forms of determining this elbow has also been suggested, and those mathematical methods. So they are the variants of the scree plot. They are algebraic variants of the scree plot. They are also used, but I am not going to discuss it here. The other method is called parallel analysis method. In this method, we extract the factors and their eigenvalues on the actual data. This is the first step. Then we do resampling from the same sample. No, sorry. We generate a sample of random numbers of this data matrix of the same order. So suppose there are 10 variables and 100 participants, so data matrix is 10 by 100. We generate several data matrices of random numbers, say 1000, 500, 2000, and then we calculate the eigenvalues for each factors, each components, and then either we average the eigenvalue or we can take the 95th percentile of the eigenvalues. But remember, these eigenvalues are based on not actual data, they are based on random data. And then we compare the actual eigenvalues with the eigenvalues obtained from random data, the chance data. Now let us compare here. The first eigenvalue is on the actual data is 6.368, and as I said earlier in my lecture, that eigenvalues tells the total variance explained by a given factor. So first factor in the actual data is explaining more variance as compared to the chance data or the random data, whether you compare with the average eigenvalue or with the 95th percentile. In second, again 1.6 is higher than 1.29. The third factor 1.20, and this is 1.24. So the actual data is explaining, the third factor in the actual data is explaining less variance than that can be explained by chance based on the random data. So this suggests that this third factor is not a significant factor because we are not able to explain more variance as compared to the chance variance. So this parallel analysis suggests that only two factors should be retained. Again, I am reiterating the method that we will calculate the actual eigenvalues, then average eigenvalue or 95th percentile eigenvalues based on several samples of random number data, and then we will retain as many factors which explains the actual eigenvalues is higher than the value obtained from the random samples. And this can be done graphically also. So in the next slide, I will show you the graph. This is the graph, and this is the dark line is the real data. This dotted line is the 95th percentile, and this is the mean average eigenvalues. And you can see that the real data is explaining more for the first two factors. But the third factor, the real data is slightly lower than the random data eigenvalue, and therefore we will retain only two factors also. So in this example, the parallel analysis as well as a scree plot both are suggesting to retain two factors. So the findings are converging, so we can have more confidence that in our data set two factors are significant and they should be retained for further analysis. Similarly, other methods, as I said, Walliser's map, minimum average partial, that can also be used. C-Hull method can be used. Other methods can be used to determine how many factors are there in our data. But this is one important step of factor analysis. Once we have decided the number of factors, then the factor extracted are the unrotated factors, which are really very difficult to interpret. So the initial solution is called unrotated factor solution or unrotated factor structure. And the grouping, the clusters, the factors are basically hidden in this unrotated factor. It will be really difficult for us to see that which variables are grouping together. So to make sense, rotation is required. And two undesirable features make it hard to interpret the unrotated data. First is the factor analysis algorithm is designed, the extraction method is designed in such a way that it maximizes the loading of all items on the first factor. And then the remaining variance of the variables are fractioned and distributed on other factors. So when you will inspect the unrotated factors, you will find that most of the variables are loading on the first factor and therefore there must be one factor. But no, after rotation the picture may become different. And the second undesirable feature that makes it hard to interpret the unrotated is that most items have large loadings on more than one factor. This is also called cross loading. So same variable may be having say 0.5 loading on first factor, zero point 0.4 on the second factor. Then this becomes difficult where to consider whether this variable should be considered on first factor or the second factor. These difficulties with the unrotated factors make the interpretation of the factors difficult, and therefore rotation of the factor is required. The rotation helps to address these issues, and the purpose of the rotation is to obtain a simple structure that can be easily interpreted and explained. Thurston and Cattell has given the criteria, 5 criteria to identify a simple structure. First is that each row contains at least one zero factor loading. Second, for each column, there are at least as many zeros as there are columns. That is the number of factors. So suppose we are having 4 factors, there must be at least 4 zeros in the columns. For any pair of factors, there are some variables with zero loadings on one factor and large loadings on the other factor. For any pair of factors, there is a sizable proportion of zero loadings. And fifth, for any pair of factors, there is only a small number of large loadings. But to make this criteria more simple, I have created one ideal simple factor structure with some real loadings in this. This will help you to understand the meaning of the simple factor structure. So this is a three factor solution. There are three factors and nine variables. On factor 1, the three variables, the first three variables are having very high loadings, and these variables are having almost near zero loadings on the other two factors. If you look column wise, these three variables are having high loading on this factor, but the remaining six are not having high loading. They are almost near zero loading. This is ideal. We will not get zero, but it will be low. It will be near zero. Similarly, when you see the next three variables, they are having high loading on the second factor, but the other variables are having zero loading. And these three variables are also having zero loading on other two factors. And these three variables, the last three variables are having high loading on the third factor, and all the remaining six variables are having zero loading on this. And these three variables are also having near zero loading on the other two factors. So this is ideal simple factor structure. By rotation, we try to approximate or reach a solution which is very close to this. We will never get this type of simple structure, but this will be close to this so that we can interpret. So now we can interpret that these three variables define the first factor, these three variables they define the second factor, and these three variables they define the third factor. And if we know the content of these, then we can try to identify the underlying latent factor why these three variables are having high loadings. So I think you must have got the idea of rotation. Why rotation is needed? Because the unrotated factors are hard to interpret, difficult to interpret. So rotation helps us in this. Now there are different types of rotations. So rotation can be broadly classified into two types. Orthogonal rotations. In this rotation, factors are considered orthogonal or uncorrelated. So if the factors are uncorrelated, they remain independent from each other, then we use orthogonal rotation. And there are different methods of orthogonal rotation. And the other type of or category of rotation is oblique rotation. We follow oblique rotation when the factors are allowed to correlate, when there is a correlation between or among the factors. So if you are having difficulty, you may explore both types. You can then see the correlations between the factors. If factors are correlated, then you can go for oblique rotation. Otherwise, you can keep the orthogonal rotation. Generally, this rotation nowadays is done using algebraical methods. So computers do certain calculations. But to have the idea of rotation, I will start with visual rotation, the symmetrical rotation, the graphical rotation, so that you can have idea. So rotation, you may try to understand that we change the viewing angles, we change the viewing angle of the vectors, we rotate the axis so that the unrotated factor structure become more interpretable. Here I have shown two factor structures. This is unrotated and this factor structure has been obtained after rotation. You see here, if you are focusing only on unrotated factor, most of the all the variables are having high loading on the first. As I said that the algorithm is such that the factor extraction tries to maximize the loading on the first factor. And then on second factor, they are having a high loading. So the cross loading problem is also there. Now it is difficult whether this variable 1 should be considered on this or this. More harder is variable 2. Both are having equal loading. So whether we should consider variable 2 on principal component, this is PC, principal component example, principal component 1 or principal component 2. But when we have rotated, now see the picture is clear. The two variables, they are having now high loadings on principal component 1 and these two variables are having high loading on principal component 2 and these two loadings are now 0, near 0, low. So now we can say that these two variables define the principal component 1 and these two variables define the principal component 2. And now look at the actual data. So this is PC1, principal component 1, one axis, and this is principal component 2. This is another axis. Two vectors are there. Now I have tried to represent, this is just, I have the accuracy I cannot guarantee. So if you see variable 1, this is unrotated plot. So variable 1 is having zero point 0.7 loading on PC1, so it is slightly higher here, and zero point 0.5 loading on here. So here we have represented variable 1. Variable 2, it is having zero point 0.6 and zero point 0.6 on both. Variable 3, it is having zero point 0.6 loading on principal component 1 and negative loading. Therefore, variable 3 is on y-axis below this x-axis. So, variable 3 and 4 are having negative loading, so they are this side. Now, if we maintain the angle of this axis at the 90 degree, so 90-degree angle is equal to zero correlation. So if two axes are at 90 degree, it means these two components are uncorrelated, orthogonal to each other. If we maintain this orthogonality and we rotate the axis, so suppose we have fixed these two axes and whenever we will rotate, both the axes will rotate simultaneously, retaining the 90-degree angle. Then, and why we are going to rotate this? In order to get a simple structure. I have just animated this rotation. Now this is the rotated component. Now you see this dotted line is the rotated axis. You can see the 90-degree relationship is there. The axes are at the 90 degree. Now variable 2 is having high loading on principal component 1 and very low but negative loading on principal component 2. This is PC2 and this is PC1. I have used prime, PC1 prime, PC2 prime. This is the rotated axis. Variable 1 is having high loading, equally high loading as the variable 2, but low loading but positive loading on principal component 2. So this is 0.7, zero point 0.7 and this is minus 0.1 and this is 0.1. Now look at variable 3 and 4. They are having high loading 0.5 and zero point 0.6 on principal component 2 and low loading on principal component 1, 0.1 and 0.2. 0.1 and 0.2. So this is a glimpse of rotation. But if there are two dimensions, two axes, we can do this type of symmetrical rotation. But suppose we are having 5 factors, 6 factors, then this type of visualization will not be possible. So in real life, these rotations are done algebraically. Similarly, in oblique rotation, when the factors are considered correlated, the resulting factors in oblique rotations are correlated factors, then we do not maintain the 90-degree angle. When the angle will depart from 90 degrees, some correlation will be introduced. So we have simplified this structure by rotating the axis but not maintaining. So we have moved the axis x as well as y both, and this 90-degree angle constraint has been removed. So the oblique constraint has been removed and axis has been rotated in such a way. Now variable and 3 and 4, they are having high loading on PC2, and variable 1 and 2, they are having high loading on PC1. So this type of rotation is called oblique rotation. So in oblique rotation, the factors are allowed to correlate. The angle is allowed to vary from 90 degree to some other angle value. But if I will go back, in orthogonal rotation, this angle constraint is maintained, and if angle will be 90 degree, it means the factors are not allowed to correlate. So this is the difference between the orthogonal rotation and the oblique rotation. In orthogonal rotation, factors are considered independent, uncorrelated, or orthogonal. In oblique rotation, factors are considered as correlated, and the axis, if we are doing visual rotation, then the axis are allowed to remove the constraint of maintaining 90 degree between the two axes. But in real life, this is done mathematically, algebraically, as I said earlier. So some of the common methods that are used for orthogonal rotation I have mentioned here. There are a lot of other methods also. Three methods are commonly used. The most commonly used method is Varimax. This is the most commonly used. This tries to simplify the factor to get a simple factor structure by maximizing the squared factor loadings of the variables of a factor within the column of the matrix. So the column variance is maximized. So some variables will have high loading on one factor, and the other variables will have near zero loading. So if some values are near zero and some values are very high, the column variance will be high. So this obtains simple structure in terms of columns only. On the other hand, the Qualtimax method, it also attempts to get a simple structure, but it tries to maximize the variance in the loadings of a variable across factors. So the row variance is maximized. So if one variable is having high loading on say factor 1, it will have lower loading on the other factors. So it does computation in such a way that the total variance explained remains same, but one variables is having a high loading on one factor and lower loading on the other factor, resulting in high variance of the row. So the Varimax maximizes the variance of the column. On the other hand, Qualtimax maximizes the variance of the row. But example, the ideal example that I have shown, that Thurston has suggested, that said that we should obtain both. The column variance should also be high and the row variance should also be high. So Equimax is the method that is designed to balance between the Varimax and Qualtimax tendency. But generally it has been found that it does not work very well, and we cannot do simultaneously. So either we do first Varimax and then Qualtimax, or first Qualtimax and then Varimax. So whichever is done first dominates the final structure. So this is one limitation. And out of these three, as I said, the Varimax is the most commonly used. So if you are going to do your research, you may start with doing Varimax rotation, but if needed, you can go for other rotations also. The factor analysis is subjective method. Whichever rotation gives you a more theoretically meaningful structure and you have some justification for doing that rotation, you can opt for that. Similarly, there are different types of oblique rotations also. One is Promax. Sometimes it is also called Promax power rotation. It computes the best orthogonal solution first and then it gradually relaxes the orthogonality constant to get a simpler structure. Basically, it is a three-step process. First, we do the orthogonal rotation, then we decide a power between 2 to 4, and we put that power on the factor loading. Say we have decided 2, then we will square the factor loadings. All the factor loadings will be squared. And then in the third step, we will that relax this orthogonality and we will see that which is the solution that is more interpretable. There is another method called Oblimin. I will suggest that please go through the books and you can go even for internet search and go in detail. I am just covering in very brief. If there is some slip of tongue or some other issues, please do post on the YouTube channel so that I can answer this because this is my initial attempt. So I may commit some errors while speaking. Oblimin. This is a general method of oblique rotation, and there are specific cases of it. So, if some delta or gamma constant is posed, if gamma is equal to 0, then this is the equivalent of the Qualtimax rotation, which is called Qualtimin. But in Qualtimax, we maintain the orthogonality. In Qualtimin, we relax the orthogonality. If gamma is equal to 1 by 2, it is called biquartimax or biquartimin. They are synonymous. This biquartimax and biquartimin both are the oblique rotations. So it is somehow similar to the Equimax method, probably. I will have to check. And if we are putting gamma is equal to 1, then it is Varimax rotation if orthogonality is maintained, and covarimin if it is the orthogonality is not maintained. So covarimin is the oblique rotation, qualtimin is the oblique rotation, biqualtimin is the oblique rotation, and they belong to the general class of oblique rotation called oblimin. So there are other methods of oblique rotations also. So after rotation, the final step is interpreting the factors. So we have rotated the factor structure and obtained a simple structure. Now, how to interpret? So there are two aspects. One is determining the we will never get the ideal loading that all the loadings are zero and the variables are loading only on a given factor. So generally the interpretation is done on the basis of large loadings. So what defines large loadings? So generally any loading above 0.3 may be considered as large, but there are different views. So a size of the loading which should be considered substantive uh, is generally sample dependent. So Point 0.3 may be non-significant for a very small sample size, and this point 0.3 value may be highly significant loading for a larger sample size. Some researchers like Gorsuch, they have provided a rule of thumb that any factor loading of 0.5 or higher may be considered as significant loading, and the variables may be considered loading on the given factor on which it is having a factor loading of zero point 0.5 or higher. But they also define a method of determining whether the factor loading is substantive or not. They say that you determine the size of the correlation which will be significant for the given sample size. Suppose 0.13 is significant for the sample size 100. Then you double that factor, that correlation. So double of the 0.13 will be 0.26. And therefore you can take that 0.26 as cutoff loading. But remember, if we are having very smaller for larger sample, this may be resulting in a very smaller cutoff loading for interpretation, and therefore we may have a lot of problem of cross factor loadings. So this should be determined very carefully. For example, I have given example that very large sample, even zero point 0.1 correlation may be considered significant, and if you are retaining all the factor loadings even up to the value of zero point 0.1, then your factor structure probably may not be interpretable. So we should go with some higher value like 0.5, 0.3, 0.4, something like that. Another thing for interpretation is that it is generally considered that a factor should have at least three high loadings variables. So if a a factor is having fewer variables than three, then those factors are generally not interpreted. Existence of factors with only two or large loading indicates factors over extracted, or the problem of multicollinearity may be there. So Gorsuch also suggests that suppose you have decided to retain six factors and you examine that after factor 4, factor 5 is having significant loading on only two variables, and then again on factor 6 it is having loading on three variables are having significant loading on factor 6, then this factor 5 and 6 are trivial factors. It is better to retain only four factors. So at least three variables should load on a factor to be interpretable. And then when you have decided which variables belong to which factor based on the magnitude of the factor loadings, then the last step is assigning names to the factor, as I have given in the previous lectures examples that performance intelligence and verbal intelligence example, somatic anxiety and uh, affective anxiety example. You can see my first lecture on this factor analytic series. There it will be clear. So the final step is to give a name of the construct, the latent variable, the latent construct which is underlying. So this is interpretation. So when you have interpreted the factor, the last step is that you have done this factor analysis on a given sample. How far this factor structure obtained on your given sample is valid. So validation should be done, and validation of factor structure can be done in several ways. One is cross validation on another sample. You replicate the study on another sample, and if the factor structure is having some congruence, and there are method of determining or calculating factor structure congruence, you can consult the book of Gorsuch factor analysis. They have given some method. Other books also cover the method of determining congruence. So cross validation on another sample is one method. If you have replicated your study on several samples and the same factor structure has been obtained again and again, then we can say that the factor solution is valid. Another way is split half validation. If you are not having time or money to do, then you do the factor analysis on half of the randomly selected sample and then validate it on the other half of the sample. And if the solutions are converging, they are having some congruence, then we can say that the factor structure is valid. And the third way is to use confirmatory factor analysis. Do it on another sample, and second time, rather than doing exploratory factor analysis, you do confirmatory factor analysis and check how far the obtained factor structure fits the data. If there is a good fit, then we can say that the factor structure is valid. So, with this lecture, I am concluding the factor analytic procedural step. In the previous lecture, I covered the preparatory stage and determining the method of doing factor extraction. And in this lecture, I have covered how to determine number of factors. Then after factor extraction, how to rotate the factors, what are the different methods of factor rotations, and once we have rotated the factor, then how to interpret the factor and how to validate the factor. In these are some of the suggested readings in which you can find some helpful material. For example, this is one very good paper by Tinsley and Tinsley, though it is published in 1987 in Counseling, Journal of Counseling Psychology. This was a special issue on statistical methods. This is a very good source, and many of points covered in my lecture are based on this paper. The use of factor analysis is counseling psychology research. I acknowledge this. And another research paper is Castello and Osborne's best practices in exploratory factor analysis. 4 recommendations for getting the most from your analysis. This also provides some practical tips, the issues that are faced by the beginning researchers. So these two research papers are very helpful, and these are two books on multivariate analysis. They also provide a lot of material on how to do factor analysis, how to interpret what are the practical issues. So this will be helpful. Thank you very much. See you very soon. In the next few lectures, I would try to cover the actual procedural step, whether you can say the tutorial on doing factor analysis using some real data. I would demonstrate how to do factor analysis, how to interpret it using some software. The SPSS is most popular software, though it is commercial and very costly, but I would explain the procedure of doing factor analysis with SPSS, and then I would also use some open source software, for example, Factor. The name of the software itself is Factor. It is a free software. You can do a lot of things related to factor analysis in this. And there are other free statistical softwares like JASP. Uh, in that factor analysis option is there, Jamoi in factor analysis is there. There are other open source software. So in next lecture, I will cover the demo part, the hands-on training, the real factor analysis, how to do. So data-based solutions will be offered in the next lecture. Thank you very much for attending to my lecture, listening, and please do provide feedback not only for this lecture but for other lectures, because I am just started learning how to create the YouTube lectures using some softwares, and mm, while speaking, slip of tongue is very common. So something, if you found adequate, inadequate, or something you find that it may be incorrect or some issues are there, please do not hesitate to post on my YouTube channel. Thank you very much. See you very soon.